My grandfathers will gave me everything, but my father gathered everyone to take it away. You ever walk into a house that feels exactly the same, but not at all? That was me 3 weeks after my grandfather's funeral. A text came in, short, sharp, like a command. Family meeting Sunday, 2 p.m. Don't be late. No explanation, no warmth, just an order from my father. And like a fool, I went. The colonial looked the way it always had. White picket fence, rose bushes my grandfather had planted for my grandmother 40 years ago, the brass mailbox that read Wellington in elegant script. The front porch swing where he used to sit with his morning coffee, reading the business section. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd find some version of home again. But the second I stepped inside, I felt it. Something was wrong. It wasn't the air, still heavy with the lingering scent of her lavender sachets. It wasn't the silence where her humming used to fill the hallways. It was the arrangement. My family sat stiff in the living room like strangers at a business meeting, and waiting with them were 2 men in pressed navy suits, leather briefcases at their feet, smiles like polished glass. Lauren, my father said, with that politician's grin he wore at country club dinners and church fundraisers. These are our family advisors. Advisors. That's when I knew this wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. They wanted the one thing they couldn't take while Grandpa William was alive, his legacy. Wellington construction had been his life's work, built from scratch in a rented garage when he was just 28, fresh out of the army with nothing but a toolbox and a determination to never depend on anyone else again. And I came prepared. See, Grandpa William wasn't just the man who raised me while my parents climbed Charlotte's social ladder. He was my anchor. When my sister Stephanie was busy with cheerleading practice and my brother Connor was glued to his PlayStation, I wanted to be at the construction sites. I loved the controlled chaos of a build, the symphony of hammers and saws, the way Grandpa's voice could cut through the noise like a foreman's whistle. When I was 14, he handed me a blueprint and said, "Let's see if your mind understands structure the way your heart does." And it did. My father never understood. He liked appearances. He liked status. He once told me, "Your grandfather builds houses. I build a lifestyle." His lifestyle was a portfolio of risky investments, a BMW he couldn't afford, and golf club memberships he treated like therapy sessions. Meanwhile, Grandpa William employed 23 people, built half the subdivisions in Mecklenburg County, and owned his equipment outright. So when the will was read 2 weeks after the funeral, the room exploded. Minor gifts were distributed, his tools to Connor, his watch to my father. And then came the earthquake. To my granddaughter, Lauren Marie Wellington, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all assets of Wellington Construction, my properties, investments, and personal effects. Silence. Then my father erupted. "This is insane." She must have been confused. "Read it again." The attorney stayed calm. "I've read it many times, Mr. Wellington." She was very clear. My sister gasped like she'd been slapped. My brother stared at his shoes, lost. And me? I just sat there numb, while my world tilted sideways. Later, in the funeral home parking lot, my father cornered me beside his gleaming BMW. His voice was honey over steel. "Sign it over, Lauren. I'll divide everything fairly. This isn't yours alone, it's ours. It's family." But it wasn't. And I knew why. Months earlier, Grandpa William had pulled me aside after Sunday dinner. His hands, weathered from decades of concrete work and lumber handling, trembled slightly as he poured sweet tea. "They're going to hate this decision," he said, his voice still strong despite his 78 years. "But you're the only one who understands what it cost me to build this." It wasn't praise. It was a warning. That night, the messages started. "Stephanie first, Lauren, please don't ruin everything we've worked for. This affects all of us." Then my mother, "Your father knows business. Let him help." Followed by my father's calculated guilt trips, "One day when you have children, you'll understand. Family comes first." Then came the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who'd never spoken to me beyond polite hellos, suddenly had opinions. "Disappointed in you, Lauren. Rose would want the family to stick together." The mailman, Tom Bradley, shook his head when he handed me bills. "Your grandmother was a saint. This isn't what she would have wanted." Over and over. Disappointment. As if loving someone meant destroying their final wishes. 2 days later, Connor showed up at my apartment. No call, no text, just standing in my doorway looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He shuffled his feet, unable to meet my eyes. "Dad's already called 3 real estate agents," he mumbled. "Says the catering business property alone could pay off the house. He's talking about expanding, maybe franchising." He paused, finally looking up. I hadn't even touched Grandma's accounts, but in my father's head, the money was already his. Connor left without the usual hug goodbye, just confusion written all over his 22-year-old face. "I don't understand why she didn't trust all of us," he said from the doorway. "Because she did trust us, she just knew the difference between trust and wisdom." The pressure intensified daily. My mother stopped by my apartment with homemade cookies and tear-filled stories about family unity. Stephanie sent links to articles about family businesses and shared inheritance. My father started showing up at Wellington Catering during my shifts, chatting with employees, dropping hints about exciting changes coming soon. The staff started asking questions. Maria, our head chef who'd worked with Grandma for 15 years, pulled me aside. "Lauren, honey, is everything okay? Your father was here asking about our supplier contracts." I assured her nothing would change, but inside, I was crumbling. Every day felt like walking a tightrope while my family shook the rope. They weren't just after money, they were after control, validation, and the right to rewrite Grandma Rose's story. The final straw came when I found my father in Grandma's office, rifling through her filing cabinets. "Just getting familiar with the business structure," he said, not even looking ashamed. That's when I realized they weren't going to stop. They were going to keep pushing until I broke or until I pushed back. And Grandma Rose hadn't raised me to break. The living room was staged like a courtroom when I arrived for what they called a family discussion. My father sat at the head of Grandma's antique dining table, grinning like a candidate on election night. The 2 advisors flanked him like bodyguards, expensive suits, confident smirks, and briefcases that probably cost more than most people's rent. Only one chair remained empty. Straight-backed, center stage, positioned so everyone could stare at me. The defendant's chair. "Lauren, sweetheart," my mother began, her voice dripping with false warmth, "we're all here because we love you. We want what's best for everyone." One of the advisors, tall, silver-haired, probably golf buddies with my father, leaned forward. "Miss Wellington, we're here for harmony. Your family simply wants unity in this difficult time." His partner, younger but equally polished, nodded like a bobblehead. They slid papers across the mahogany table. Legal documents with my father's signature already scrawled at the bottom. "A simple redistribution plan," Silverhair explained. "You retain 20% ownership, plus a generous management salary. The remaining 80% returns to the family trust, ensuring everyone benefits from Rose's legacy." 20%. Of my grandmother's life's work. Of the business I'd helped run since high school. Of the legacy she'd specifically entrusted to me. "Everyone wins," young Suit added with practiced sincerity. But unity wasn't in the will. And Grandma Rose had taught me that sometimes the right choice isn't the popular one. I stayed calm. Didn't raise my voice. Instead, I opened my messenger bag and began laying out the truth. First came the bank statements. 3 years' worth, highlighted in yellow. Emergency withdrawals to bail out my father's failed investments. Temporary loans that were never repaid. I'd found them in Grandma's desk, meticulously filed under family obligations. Next came the photos. Stephanie's Instagram posts from Cabo, tagged during Grandma's supposed money troubles. Connor's new gaming setup, purchased the same week he'd asked Grandma for rent money. My parents cruised to Alaska while claiming they needed help with mortgage payments. Then came the receipts. Every emergency request documented in Grandma's careful handwriting. Marcus, car repair, $2,800. Linda, medical bills, $1,500. Stephanie, school expenses, $950. All lies. All carefully tracked. Finally, I laid down the sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's distinctive script. "For Lauren, if they come for it." I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. My father's campaign smile cracked like old paint. "Where did you get these?" "Grandma kept records," I said simply. She wasn't confused. She was tired. My sister shrank into the sofa cushions. Even the advisors started shifting uncomfortably, realizing they weren't here for legitimate legal business. They were here to help my family steal from a dead woman. That's when Connor finally found his voice. You told us she was being selfish, Dad. You said she didn't understand family. His voice cracked with betrayal. But you lied about everything. He stood up, looking at me for the first time in weeks. Can I come with you? I nodded, and together we walked out of that house, leaving behind the family that had confused love with entitlement, and loyalty with theft. That night, Connor and I sat in my apartment eating takeout Chinese food, the silence between us healing rather than heavy. For the first time since Grandma's funeral, I felt like I could breathe. My phone buzzed constantly, angry texts from my father, pleading messages from my mother, Stephanie's dramatic voicemails, but I ignored them all. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, Connor said, picking at his low mane. Dad made it sound like you were being greedy, keeping everything for yourself. He's good at making things sound different than they are, I replied. That's why Grandma documented everything. The next morning, I decided it was time to read the sealed letter. I drove to Wellington Catering's office, a modest space above the kitchen where Grandma had managed everything from payroll to wedding consultations. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it, neat stacks of invoices, her reading glasses folded on top of her appointment book, a cold cup of coffee with a lipstick mark on the rim. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. My dearest Lauren, if you're reading this, then they came for it just like I knew they would. Your father has been asking about my plans for months, dropping hints about family fairness and shared responsibility. What he doesn't understand is that I've been watching, and I've been preparing. You think I didn't notice when the emergency calls started coming more frequently? When every family dinner became a subtle negotiation? When your father started talking about maximizing the business potential and bringing in professional management? I built Wellington Catering with my own hands because I refused to be dependent on anyone ever again. After your grandfather left us when your father was 12, I swore no Wellington woman would ever be at the mercy of someone else's choices. This business isn't just income, it's independence. You understood that, even as a child. While the others saw dollar signs, you saw dignity. You learned every recipe not because I forced you, but because you respected what they represented. You stayed late to help with inventory not for allowance, but because you understood that small details build strong foundations. Your father will tell people I was confused, maybe even manipulated in my old age. He'll paint you as selfish and me as senile. Let them talk. The business records speak louder than gossip. Lead with love, but never mistake kindness for weakness. Take care of our people, Maria, James, and the others who helped us build this. And remember, sometimes protecting what matters means disappointing people who matter to you. All my love and all my faith, Grandma Rose. P.S. Check the safe behind my desk portrait. The combination is your birthday, April 15th, 97. There's something there for Connor when he's ready to understand what real family loyalty looks like. I sat in that office for an hour, tears streaming down my face, finally understanding the weight of what Grandma Rose had entrusted to me. This wasn't just about money or business ownership. She'd chosen me to be the guardian of our family's integrity. That afternoon, I called Connor. Meet me at Grandma's office. There's something you need to see. When he arrived, I handed him the letter and opened the safe. Inside was another envelope marked for Connor, when he chooses love over loyalty to lies, and a cashier's check for $50,000, enough for his final year of college, completely free and clear. The inheritance was never about favorites. It was about wisdom. The following week, my father launched his full-scale assault. He hired his own attorney, some shark from a downtown Charlotte firm who specialized in contesting wills. The local newspaper somehow got wind of the family dispute over Rose Wellington's estate, painting it as a tragic tale of a grieving family torn apart by inheritance drama. I woke up Tuesday morning to find protesters outside Wellington Catering. Well, not exactly protesters, my father's golf buddies and their wives, holding signs that read "Family First" and "Honor Rose's Memory." Mrs. Pemberton from the country club actually had the nerve to approach me as I unlocked the front door. "Lauren dear, surely you can see how this looks," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see the family divided like this." I wanted to ask her when she'd last spoken to my grandmother, since Rose Wellington wouldn't have been caught dead at the Pinebrook Country Club, but I held my tongue. Inside, my staff was rattled. Maria met me in the kitchen, worry creasing her face. "Lauren, your father called this morning. He wants to schedule a meeting with all the employees. Says there might be some management changes coming." That's when I knew I had to act. I called an all-hands meeting for that afternoon. 12 employees gathered in our small conference room, the same people who'd worked alongside Grandma Rose for years, who'd stayed late for last-minute catering orders, who'd become more family than my actual family. "I need you all to know something," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Despite what you may be hearing around town, nothing is changing at Wellington Catering. My grandmother left the business to me, and I intend to honor her trust." James, our delivery driver who'd been with us for 8 years, raised his hand. "Lauren, we trust you. But some of us are worried about job security with all this family drama." I pulled out copies of Grandma's financial records, the real ones, not the sanitized version my father had been peddling around town. "Wellington Catering is debt-free. We have 6 months of operating expenses in reserve. Your jobs are secure because my grandmother was a better businesswoman than anyone gave her credit for." The relief in the room was palpable. These people had invested their lives in this business, and my father's maneuvering was threatening their livelihoods for his financial gain. That evening, my father showed up at the catering facility. He didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place. "Lauren, this has gone far enough. You're embarrassing the family." "The only thing embarrassing this family is your behavior," I replied, not looking up from the invoice I was reviewing. "I'll contest the will. I'll drag this through court for years if I have to." I finally looked at him, really looked. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped with homework, who'd once been my hero. Now all I saw was entitlement wearing a familiar face. "Do whatever you need to do, Dad. But I'm not signing anything." He left without another word, and I knew the real war was just beginning. 3 months into the legal battle, I was drowning in attorney fees and depositions, but I refused to surrender. My father's lawyer was everything you'd expect: expensive suit, condescending smile, and a talent for making simple questions sound like accusations. "Miss Wellington," he said during my deposition, "isn't it true that you've always been jealous of your siblings' relationship with your father?" "No," I replied calmly. "It's true that I've always been closer to my grandmother." "And isn't it possible that an elderly woman might have been influenced by someone she spent considerable time with?" That's when I understood their strategy. They were going to paint me as a manipulative granddaughter who'd taken advantage of an aging woman's confusion. It was disgusting, but it was smart. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I was closing up the catering kitchen when Connor burst through the back door, his face flushed with anger. "They offered me money," he said without preamble. "Dad and his lawyers. They want me to testify that Grandma was confused toward the end, that you were pressuring her." My heart dropped. "And I told them to go to hell." He sat heavily on one of the prep stools. "But Lauren, they're not going to stop. Dad hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on you. They're calling Grandma's doctor, her neighbors, anyone who might say she wasn't thinking clearly." That weekend, I made a decision that changed everything. I drove to the Sunset Manor retirement community where Grandma Rose had volunteered every Tuesday for the past 5 years. Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, 93 and sharp as a tack, had been her closest friend there. "Lauren, honey," Mrs. Fletcher said, inviting me into her small apartment. "I've been waiting for you to visit." She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a shoebox. "Rose asked me to keep these safe. Said you might need them someday." Inside were recordings. Dozens of small digital files on an old voice recorder. Grandma Rose's voice filled the quiet apartment. March 15, 2024. "Marcus called again today asking about my estate planning. He suggested I might want to reconsider my options to be fair to everyone. He doesn't realize I've been recording these conversations for months." File after file documented my father's pressure campaign. His attempts to convince her she was being unfair. His suggestions that I was too young, too inexperienced, too emotional to handle business responsibilities. His barely veiled threats about family unity and what might happen if she chose favorites. But the most damning recording was from just 2 weeks before her death. "Marcus came by today with papers," Grandma's tired voice continued. Some kind of trust document that would split everything equally. He said it was what the family needs and that I should sign it while I still can. The implication was clear: sign now while you're competent, or we'll question your competence later. Mrs. Fletcher patted my hand. Your grandmother wasn't confused, dear. She was terrified. Terrified that everything she'd built would be torn apart by people who saw dollar signs instead of legacy. I left Sunset Manor with a box of evidence and a heart full of rage. My father hadn't just been pressuring me, he'd been manipulating a dying woman. The war was far from over, but now I had ammunition. 2 weeks later, I walked into the courthouse conference room where my father, his attorneys, and a court mediator waited for what they assumed would be my surrender. The legal fees were mounting, the stress was overwhelming, and they figured I'd finally break. Instead, I set Mrs. Fletcher's shoebox on the table. Before we discuss any settlement, I said, I think everyone should hear something. My father's face went white as Grandma Rose's voice filled the room. His lawyers tried to object, but the mediator was fascinated. For 30 minutes, we listened to documented evidence of manipulation, coercion, and emotional abuse of an elderly woman. The last recording was the most powerful. I'm changing my will again today. Not because Lauren asked me to, but because I finally accepted that some people see love as leverage. I won't let my life's work become another casualty of Marcus's entitlement. When the recordings finished, the silence was deafening. My father's lead attorney quietly excused himself for a phone call. The younger lawyer suddenly found his legal pad extremely interesting. Marcus, the mediator said carefully, these recordings raise serious questions about elder abuse and undue influence, not by your daughter but by you. My father's political facade finally crumbled. She was my mother. I had every right to discuss her finances. You had every right to love her, I said, standing up. But you chose to pressure her instead. The case collapsed within days. My father's attorneys withdrew, citing ethical conflicts. The family drama that had consumed 3 months of my life evaporated like morning fog. But the real healing began when I reopened Grandma Rose's study at the house. I'd avoided it since the funeral, but Connor convinced me it was time. The air smelled of lavender and old paper, exactly like her. Her reading chair sat empty by the window where she'd spent countless hours with her romance novels and business journals. In her desk drawer, I found one final letter, not sealed, just folded, with my name written on top. Lauren, if you've made it this far, then you've learned what I hoped you would. Protecting what matters isn't about being stubborn, it's about having courage when courage costs you everything. Wellington Catering will survive because you understand that business is about people, not profit. Lead with love, but never mistake kindness for weakness. Take care of our employees like family, because they are. And forgive your father eventually. He's not evil, just lost. Some people spend their whole lives looking for shortcuts to happiness and miss the joy in building something that lasts. All my love, Grandma Rose. 6 months later, Wellington Catering expanded into a second location. Connor joined the business after graduation, bringing fresh ideas and genuine passion. We established the Rose Wellington Scholarship Fund for culinary students from working families. My father and I still don't speak regularly, but the anger has faded into something closer to pity. Stephanie occasionally stops by for lunch, though we both pretend the inheritance battle never happened. Some inheritances come in money, others in scars. Mine came in both. Grandma Rose didn't choose me because I was her favorite. She chose me because I was the only one who understood that some things are worth more than money. And maybe I won't always be loved for doing what's right, but I sleep at night. And I do.